I used to think I was pretty good at reading people, like I could tell when something was off just from the way someone stood or spoke. But that confidence started to fall apart during a road trip I took back in late October of 2022, when I decided to drive alone from Ohio to Colorado to clear my head after a messy breakup, and I remember it was already getting dark when I stopped at this small, nearly empty gas station somewhere in rural Kansas, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights buzz overhead and everything feels a little too quiet, like the world outside just stopped existing, and there was only one other car parked there, an older pickup truck with mud caked along the sides, and I noticed the driver standing by the entrance before I even stepped out of my car, just watching me in a way that made me feel like I had interrupted something. But I brushed it off because I didn't want to overthink it. So I went inside, grabbed a bottle of water and some snacks, and when I got to the counter, the same guy walked in behind me, his boots heavy against the tile, and he stood a little too close, like close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke and something sour on his clothes, and he didn't say anything at first, just kind of lingered there, and when I glanced back at him, he gave me this small nod, like we already knew each other, which was strange because I was certain I had never seen him before. And I tried to ignore it, paid for my stuff, and walked out quickly, but when I got back to my car, I noticed he had followed me out and was standing a few feet away, pretending to look at his phone even though the screen was dark, and that uneasy feeling crept in stronger this time, so I got in, locked the doors immediately, and started the engine, but before I could pull away, he suddenly knocked on my window, not aggressively, just 2 slow taps, and I froze for a second, debating whether to acknowledge him or just drive off. But something about the situation made me roll the window down just a crack, and that's when he leaned in slightly and said in a calm, almost casual tone, "Hey, I think you dropped something back there." And I felt this immediate confusion because I hadn't taken anything out of my pockets, and I told him that, but he insisted, pointing vaguely toward the side of the building where it was darker, and for a split second I considered getting out to check, but something about the way he was watching me, like he was waiting for me to make that decision, made me hesitate, and instead I shook my head and said I was sure I didn't drop anything, and that's when his expression changed, just slightly, but enough for me to notice, like the friendliness dropped and something colder took its place, and he stepped back, raised his hands like he didn't mean anything by it, and said, "All right, just trying to help." But he didn't move away right away, he just stood there, looking at me through the glass, and I didn't waste another second. I drove off, trying to shake off the tension, telling myself it was probably nothing, just an awkward encounter with a stranger. But as I got back onto the highway and the gas station lights faded behind me, I checked my rearview mirror out of habit, and that's when I saw headlights pulling out of the station, turning onto the same road. And at first I didn't think much of it because it was the only road for miles, but after about 10 minutes of driving, I noticed the same headlights still behind me, keeping the exact same distance, not passing, not falling back, just there, and I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore, so I sped up slightly, and they sped up too, matching me almost perfectly, and that's when that earlier interaction started replaying in my head. The way he had tried to get me to step out of the car, the way he had been watching me. And a knot formed in my stomach as I realized that maybe I hadn't just been imagining things, so I decided to test it. I took the next exit, one that led to a small, unlit road instead of staying on the main highway, and as soon as I turned, I watched closely in my mirror, and sure enough, those same headlights followed me off the exit, staying right behind me, and that's when I knew for sure that whatever this was, it wasn't a coincidence. And I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing with what to do next, because I was now on a darker, emptier road with no other cars in sight, and the only thing behind me was that same truck, keeping pace, like it had no intention of letting me go, and as I drove further into the darkness, I realized I might have just made a mistake by leaving the highway, because now there was nowhere to go, and nowhere to hide. And the headlights behind me suddenly got a little closer. I didn't panic right away, at least not outwardly, but I could feel it building under the surface like pressure, the kind that makes your hands grip the steering wheel tighter without you realizing it, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, watching those headlights creep closer until they were uncomfortably near, like the driver had decided to stop pretending this was anything but intentional. And I remember checking my phone quickly, seeing I had barely 1 bar of signal, which didn't help at all, and the road I was on was just this long, flat stretch with nothing but open land on both sides, no houses, no businesses, not even streetlights, just darkness swallowing everything beyond my headlights, and I started thinking about turning around. But the way the truck was positioned behind me made it feel like if I slowed down even a little, they'd close the gap instantly. So instead I pressed the gas harder, pushing my car faster than I normally would on a road like that, and for a moment, it seemed like I was gaining distance, the headlights shrinking slightly, giving me a bit of hope, but it didn't last, because within seconds they sped up too, matching me again like before, and that's when I realized this wasn't just someone following casually, they were actively staying with me, adjusting to whatever I did, and that realization made everything feel heavier. Like I wasn't in control anymore, so I started looking for anything, any sign of life. A building, a turn, something that could give me an option, and eventually I saw a faint sign up ahead indicating a small town a few miles further, and that became my only focus, just get there, don't stop, don't slow down. And I remember thinking that if I could reach somewhere with lights or people, maybe whoever was behind me would back off, but the closer I got, the more aggressive the truck seemed to become. Because suddenly the headlights surged forward again until they were right on my tail. So close that I could barely see anything but bright glare in my mirror, and then they flashed their high beams repeatedly, like they were trying to signal me to pull over, and for a split second I considered the possibility that maybe this was some misunderstanding, like maybe there really was something wrong with my car, but that thought disappeared the moment they swerved slightly toward my lane. Just enough to make it clear they were trying to intimidate me, and my heart started pounding harder at that point, because it felt like the situation was escalating beyond just being followed, so I kept driving, refusing to pull over, and after another minute of this, the truck suddenly shifted lanes and pulled up beside me, matching my speed perfectly, and I turned my head just enough to see the driver again, illuminated briefly by my headlights. And it was the same man from the gas station. Staring straight ahead at first, then slowly turning his head toward me, and I swear there was no expression on his face at all, just this blank, almost detached look, like he was completely calm while I was anything but, and he raised one hand slightly, gesturing downward, like he wanted me to slow down or stop, but I shook my head instinctively and kept my eyes forward. And that's when he suddenly accelerated, cutting in front of me sharply, forcing me to hit the brakes to avoid hitting him. And for a second I thought he was going to stop right there in the middle of the road, blocking me completely, but instead he sped up again, staying just ahead of me now, like he was trying to control where I went, and that terrified me more than anything else, because it felt deliberate, like he was guiding me somewhere. And I had no idea where or why, so I made a split-second decision and swerved into the opposite lane, flooring the gas to pass him as quickly as I could, and for a moment it worked, I got ahead of him, putting some distance between us, and I didn't slow down after that. I just kept going, hoping the town was close, and after what felt like forever, I finally started to see lights in the distance. Small at first, then clearer as I got closer, and the relief hit me almost instantly, but it was mixed with this lingering fear because I didn't know if he would follow me all the way in, and as I reached the edge of the town, I noticed a small diner on the right side with a few cars parked outside, its neon sign flickering slightly, and without thinking twice, I pulled into the parking lot quickly, stopping near the entrance, and I grabbed my phone, ready to run inside if I needed to. But before I opened the door, I looked in the mirror one more time, expecting to see the truck right behind me again, except this time, the road behind me was completely empty, like he had vanished the moment I reached somewhere with other people around, and for a few seconds I just sat there, trying to process it. Telling myself it was over, that I was safe now, but something about the way he had disappeared so suddenly didn't sit right with me, because it felt less like he gave up and more like he didn't need to follow me anymore, and that uneasy thought stayed with me as I stepped out of the car and walked toward the diner, glancing around instinctively, half expecting to see that same truck parked somewhere nearby. But everything looked normal, just a quiet place with a few people inside. And I told myself I was overreacting, that I should just get some food, calm down, and then get back on the road. But as I reached for the diner door, I noticed something small on the ground near my feet, something that definitely hadn't been there before, and when I looked down to see what it was, my stomach dropped because it was a single, folded piece of paper with my car's license plate number written on it. I stood there staring at that piece of paper longer than I probably should have, like my brain was trying to reject what I was seeing, because there was no reasonable explanation for how it got there, not in the few seconds between me pulling in and stepping out of the car, and definitely not with my license plate written on it in thick, uneven handwriting that looked rushed but intentional. And I remember glancing back at my car immediately, half expecting to see someone crouched behind it or standing just out of sight, but the parking lot was still, the only movement coming from the faint flicker of the diner's neon sign reflecting off the pavement, and for a moment I considered just getting back in the car and driving off again, leaving the whole situation behind. But something about that note made it feel like I was already too involved to ignore it, like whoever had been following me wanted me to notice it. So I picked it up carefully, turning it over to see if there was anything else written on it, but there wasn't. Just the number, nothing more, and that somehow made it worse, because it left everything open to interpretation, and as I stood there trying to decide what to do next, I heard the diner door open behind me, the sound making me flinch more than I'd like to admit, and I turned to see an older man stepping out, probably in his late 60s, wearing a faded jacket and holding a coffee cup. And he looked at me briefly before glancing toward the road. Then back at me again, like he could tell something was off, and he asked if I was all right in a casual but slightly concerned tone, and I hesitated for a second before just saying yeah, I'm fine, because I didn't even know how to explain what had just happened without sounding paranoid. But he didn't seem convinced, his eyes shifting past me toward the empty road again. And then he said something that made that uneasy feeling come rushing back even stronger. He said, "You didn't happen to come in from the South Road, did you?" And I felt my chest tighten a little because that was exactly where I had come from, and I nodded slowly, asking why, and he took a small sip from his cup before answering, like he was choosing his words carefully, and he said that road didn't get much traffic at night, but every once in a while, someone would come through in a hurry, usually alone, and sometimes they'd stop here looking shaken up, and I could tell by the way he was speaking that he wasn't just making conversation, so I asked him what he meant, and he looked at me again, this time more directly, and said, "They usually mention a truck." And hearing that sent this cold feeling down my back, because it confirmed that what I had just experienced wasn't isolated, that other people had gone through something similar, and I asked him if he was serious, and he nodded, setting his cup down on a nearby ledge, and he told me that over the past couple of years, there had been a handful of reports, not official ones necessarily, but stories from travelers passing through, all describing a pickup truck that would follow them for miles, sometimes trying to get them to pull over, sometimes just staying behind them until they reached town, and every time, the driver was described almost the same way, quiet, calm, not aggressive in an obvious way, but persistent enough to make people uncomfortable. And I felt my grip tighten around the piece of paper in my hand as I listened, because it all matched too closely, and I asked him if anyone had ever actually been hurt, and he paused for a moment before shaking his head slowly, saying not that he knew of, but that didn't mean nothing had happened, just that no one stuck around long enough to find out, and that answer didn't exactly make me feel better. And then I showed him the paper, unfolding it so he could see the number written on it. And his expression changed almost immediately. The casual concern replaced by something more serious, and he took a step closer, squinting slightly as he looked at it, and then he asked me where I found it, and when I told him it was right by my car, he let out a quiet breath and said, "That's new," which wasn't exactly reassuring, and I asked him what he meant by that, and he said that before, people only ever mentioned being followed, maybe signaled to pull over, but nothing like this, nothing that suggested the driver had gotten that close without being seen, and as he said that, I felt this sudden urge to check my car more thoroughly, so I walked back over to it, scanning around the tires, under the chassis as much as I could without kneeling down, and everything looked normal at first, but then I noticed something else, something small but out of place, stuck just under the edge of my rear bumper, and when I leaned in closer to get a better look, I realized it was a tiny, dark object, about the size of a coin but thicker, with a faint blinking light that was barely visible unless you were looking directly at it, and the moment it registered what it might be, my stomach dropped again, because it looked exactly like some kind of tracking device, and I reached out instinctively, my hand hovering there for a second before I pulled it away, unsure if I should touch it or not, and I remember looking back toward the road once more. That same empty stretch where the truck had disappeared, and for the first time since this started, I had this clear, unavoidable thought that whatever this man had been trying to do back at the gas station, it hadn't ended when I drove away, it had only just begun, and the worst part was realizing that if I hadn't stopped here, if I had stayed on the highway and kept going like nothing happened, I probably never would have noticed any of this until it was too late.